London, 1853. Music spilled through the ballroom, light shimmering over dozens of candelabras, while the Duke of Leicester watched everything with the polished boredom of a man who had seen the same charms repeated for years. Leonard Hawke, 32, knew every gesture of that social theatre, the practiced smiles, the fans that spoke louder than words, the glances that promised much and delivered little. He moved among the ladies with the ease of someone born to be observed, fully aware of the murmurs his presence stirred. The mask he had worn for so long made everything predictable, but that night, something fractured the monotony. She stood near a marble column as quiet as a shadow that wished not to be noticed. Her gown, too dark for a ball, almost a silent mourning, set her apart from the sea of pale silks. Her brown hair was pinned back without ornament, a modest brooch resting over her heart, and at her side 2 younger girls barely containing their excitement for the waltz. And yet, nothing about her said festivity. There was something in her upright posture, in her stillness, that suggested a strength that needed no display, a presence that, precisely because it did not ask for attention, forced him to look twice. Before he realized it, Leonard was already crossing the ballroom. She lifted her eyes when his shadow reached her. They were dark, attentive, yet marked by an old weariness youth had not erased. He offered a flawless bow, fully expecting the answer he always received. "My lady," he began, voice smooth from years of practice, "it would be an honor if you granted me this dance." A brief silence followed. She did not blush, she did not smile. Her hands remained clasped before her, one finger brushing the brooch as if grounding herself in something unseen. "I thank you, Your Grace, but I must decline." A sharp whisper rippled through the room. To refuse the Duke of Leicester, and so calmly, was nearly a scandal. He knew what he should do, step back with elegance, soften the incident, let it dissolve into the night. But her gaze, steady, honest, free of fear or coquetry, held him still. "May I ask why?" he murmured, quietly enough that only she could hear. For a moment, her eyes clouded, not with shyness, but with contained grief. "Because I am in mourning, Your Grace, even though I must accompany my sisters tonight, and some things matter more than a waltz." She offered a perfect curtsy and walked back toward the younger girls waiting for her. In a few steps, she disappeared into the tapestry of light and shadow. Leonard did not move. He felt, clearly and uncomfortably, the mask he wore without thought tremble, almost crack. She had said no. And for the first time in a very long while, something inside him demanded an answer. If you too cherish period stories, those that whisper like old letters and echo like longing hearts, leave your like and subscribe to the Countess's Tales. Your support allows these narratives to cross oceans and reach more souls around the world. And before you go, tell me in the comments which city and country you're watching from. It's always enchanting to discover how far our stories travel. Leonard Hawke was not a man accustomed to being surprised. At 32, the Duke of Leicester knew London's social game with the precision of a seasoned general. He knew when to smile, when to retreat, when to let his gaze linger just long enough to tint a young lady's cheeks with rose. For more than a decade, he had cultivated the reputation of a refined seducer, never scandalous enough to endanger the title, always intriguing enough to keep chaperones alert and debutantes hopeful. But in recent months, something had shifted. Conversations repeated themselves like rehearsed verses. Smiles felt like perfect replicas of one another. It was like performing in a play whose script he already knew by heart and had begun to tire of. Until that night. Until her. Hours after the ball, seated in the quiet study of his Mayfair residence, Leonard watched the embers dying in the fireplace while he turned his brandy in the glass. Her name had reached him through Lord Ashton, always far too informed. Miss Olivia Brennan, eldest daughter of Henry Brennan, the late shipowner whose fleet had dominated English trade for decades. Nearly a year since his death, the soft shadow of mourning still evident. 2 younger sisters under her protection. A substantial fortune, no declared suitor, and those eyes, dark, direct, painfully honest. Leonard leaned back in the armchair, irritated with himself. He did not pursue women. He never needed to. They came to him with trembling fans and measured smiles, and he merely decided whether to grant attention or not. But Miss Brennan had refused him as though his title meant nothing, as though the splendor that dazzled London held no weight against the quiet grief she carried. Because some things matter more than an invitation to dance. The memory echoed with a calm dignity that unsettled him almost personally. Her hand touching the brooch, the steadiness of her voice, the absolute refusal to play the game. She did not pretend. She did not perform. She was, almost disarmingly, simply herself. He finished the brandy, feeling the warmth spread through his chest. He should forget her. Seek another distraction. There were countless options. But he knew, with that clarity that hurts, that he would not forget her any time soon, because for the first time in many years, someone had treated him as a man, not as a title. And for the first time, Leonard Hawke wanted something he could neither demand nor effortlessly charm, something that required him to be more than the name he carried. He wanted to understand the woman who had said no and, with a force almost uncomfortable, find a way to one day be worthy of a yes. Chapter 1. The Weight of Silence. Olivia Brennan had risen before dawn ever since the day her father died, and many months later, the habit remained. The room was still wrapped in shadow. A thin silver line of early light slipped through the heavy curtains. For a few quiet moments she lay still, feeling the familiar weight settle in her chest. Responsibility, longing, unease. Always the three of them, always together. It would soon be a year. Almost a year since Henry Brennan had closed his eyes for the last time, leaving behind 3 daughters, a considerable fortune, and a silence that neither time nor routine had managed to dissolve. Olivia rose slowly and pulled the wool shawl from the chair around her shoulders. The Bloomsbury house slept deeply. The maids would not wake for another hour. Her sisters, exhausted from their court presentation and the ball that had followed, would certainly sleep well into the morning. Barefoot, moving with light steps, Olivia descended the stairs and crossed the corridor toward the room that had once been her father's study. The scent of paper, ink, and polished wood still lingered there, stubborn, familiar, just as present as the absence of the man who had spent countless nights reviewing contracts, route maps, and figures that sustained the family's wealth. She lit the lamp on the desk, bringing into view the ledger Mr. Cornelius Hartwell, attorney and executor named by the will, had delivered the week before. The pages were filled with numbers, properties, investments, everything arranged with impeccable precision, too arranged, too distant, legitimate, untouchable, and completely beyond her reach. Frustration rose slowly, burning behind her ribs. Her father had raised her to think clearly, to question, to understand accounts and business with the same ease other young ladies learned music and embroidery. He used to say, "You see beyond the numbers, Olivia. That is where your strength lies." But the law did not care about the strength of women. It cared about husbands. And since she had none, Hartwell made every decision as if Olivia were a well-mannered visitor on her own estate, always polite, always correct, always speaking to her as one explains the world to a very intelligent child, yet one deemed incapable. The ledger closed with more force than she intended, the sound echoing against the silent walls. And then, like a wave breaking, the memory of the previous night returned, the brilliant ballroom, Charlotte and Beatrice glowing under the gold light, and then him, the Duke of Leicester, Leonard Hawke with those amber-colored eyes and the calculated smile chaperones watched closely and debutantes dreamed about. Olivia had recognized him immediately. Who wouldn't? The Duke, whose well-trained charm was discussed at dinners and repeated in hushed, breathless tones in hallway corners. When he had crossed the ballroom straight toward her, the air itself had seemed to hold its breath. She had felt the weight of the glances, expectation, curiosity, judgment. They expected her to bow, to blush, to accept. But Olivia was tired of masks, tired of men accustomed to getting everything with a single well-placed smile. And when she faced those golden eyes, she saw nothing but another bored gentleman seeking distraction. She would not become one more name murmured with amusement at a gentleman's club. "Because I am in mourning, Your Grace." The words had been true, but not the whole truth. The whole truth was that Olivia had no energy and no patience for charming dukes who collected other people's stories. She had sisters to protect, an inheritance she could only oversee from afar, and a grief she still had not finished honoring. Morning light had begun to touch the edges of the desk when hurried footsteps echoed in the hallway. The door burst open and Charlotte appeared, still in her nightgown, wrapped in a light robe, curls dishevelled and eyes shining with youthful excitement. "Olivia, you won't believe it." She nearly tripped on the carpet. "Beatrice just told me. Lady Ashton sent a note. We've been invited to her tea tomorrow. She hardly ever receives new families." Her excitement was almost a burst of sunlight inside the dim room. Olivia forced a smile and reached out to steady her. "That is wonderful, dear." Charlotte stepped even closer, lowering her voice as though delivering imperial secrets. "And there's more." Her eyes sparkled. "Everyone is talking about you and the Duke of Leinster." Olivia's smile faltered. "There is nothing to talk about." "How can you say that?" "You refused him, Livy. No one refuses the Duke of Leinster." Charlotte clasped her hands around Olivia's, practically trembling. "It was so bold, almost romantic." "It was none of that." Olivia slipped free gently and turned toward the window, seeking the cool morning air. "It was simply a polite refusal. Nothing more. Nothing more." And yet, as she spoke the words, something shifted inside her, a faint tremor. Unwanted. Unexpected. The memory of that golden gaze, surprised, almost vulnerable. The brief, dangerously brief feeling that for an instant she had seen beyond his flawless mask. And the uneasy understanding that Leonard Hawke was not the kind of man who forgot a rejection. Olivia straightened her shoulders with deliberate resolve. She had real concerns, sisters to protect, a fortune to understand, a grief to honor. She had no time for charming dukes and their polished games. But when she turned toward the window, the morning sun touched her skin, warm, insistent, and the echo of his gaze returned, soft and stubborn, as though it had no intention of leaving any time soon. Chapter 2. The Silent Challenge. Leonard Hawke was not a man who frequented afternoon teas. Daytime gatherings belonged to watchful matrons and anxious debutantes, places where reputations were shaped with sweetness and venom poured into fine porcelain. He preferred clubs, where sincerity, unpleasant as it often was at least easier to find. But the moment Lady Ashton mentioned, with one of those knowing smiles only women like her possessed, that the Brennan sisters would be attending, Leonard accepted the invitation before he even thought it through. Now standing in the impeccably lit Ashton drawing room, he began to question his own sanity. Leinster. Lord Pemberton appeared beside him, balancing a teacup with amused ease. "I never imagined I'd find you here. What extraordinary lady dragged you into such a luminous event?" Leonard kept his expression neutral, his gaze sweeping over the bergamot-scented room. Social courtesy. "Ah, of course." Pemberton's smile widened. "Absolutely nothing to do with the young lady who dismissed you last night, with the grace all of London is whispering about?" Leonard lifted a brow, ready to respond, but Lady Ashton's melodic voice cut through the murmur of conversations. "My dear Mrs. Brennan, welcome, my dears." And then he saw her. Olivia Brennan entered with her sisters, moving with the same understated elegance she'd carried the night before. In the daylight it was even clearer. Her posture impeccable, chin lifted, gaze alert, not from vanity but from vigilance. Her eyes found his. It lasted only a heartbeat, precise and quiet. Leonard noticed the faint hesitation in her step, the slight tightening of her lips, the subtle tension in the way she held her fan. But she did not look away. She held his gaze with steady composure before turning back to Lady Ashton. She treated him as she would any other gentleman, no more, no less. The stab of irritation that went through him was unexpected and sharp. He was accustomed to inviting smiles, lingering glances, conversations that opened like blooming flowers. But Olivia Brennan met him with distant courtesy, almost cool, and, inexplicably, that only drew him closer. "Your Grace," The soft voice came from his left. Beatrice Brennan, fair-haired and graceful, offered him a flawless curtsy. Charlotte lingered just behind her. Lady Ashton suggested I greet you. I am Beatrice Brennan. Leonard inclined his head. The pleasure is mine, Miss Beatrice. I hope you enjoyed your first ball. Oh, I loved it. She lowered her voice. Charlotte and I only worry for Livy. She didn't dance at all. The mourning still weighs on her. Livy, Leonard repeated. The nickname struck something unexpected within him. Olivia, Beatrice corrected quickly, blushing. It's how we call her. Beatrice. The voice behind them was calm, firm, and Leonard turned before he realized he'd moved. Olivia stood close enough for him to catch the soft scent of lavender. Lady Ashton is calling. Of course. Beatrice stepped back. Excuse me, Your Grace. Olivia did not leave immediately. Miss Brennan. His voice came out lower than he intended. What a pleasant surprise to find you here. Your Grace. Her reply was polite yet alert. I hope you are enjoying the tea. I admit events like this rarely appeal to me. A faint smile touched his lips. But today, I made an exception. He saw the moment his words reached her, the slight stiffening of her shoulders, the nearly imperceptible tightening of her fingers around the fan. Still, her composure remained flawless. Then I hope the exception does not disappoint you, Your Grace. Her voice was soft, but there was steel beneath every syllable. Good day. She curtsied with perfect grace and walked away, leaving him once again with the distinct sensation of having been dismissed, with elegance, firmness, and not a single tremor. Pemberton returned to his side, barely hiding a laugh. Good Lord, Lannister. Refused twice, in broad daylight. Leonard did not answer. His gaze stayed fixed on Olivia, now speaking with Lady Ashton, her posture impeccable, her expression serene. But he had noticed the strong grip on the fan, the faint tremor in her fingers, the breath that caught for the briefest instant. Olivia Brennan was not indifferent to him. She only worked very hard to appear so, and Leonard recognized defenses when he saw them, walls built from grief, duty, pride. For the first time in years, he felt something dangerous, a quiet, solemn determination. This was not conquest, not wounded vanity. It was something new, something he did not yet know how to name. Olivia Brennan had refused him twice. And Leonard Hawke, who had never sought anything with true intention, found himself willing to wait as long as it took to become someone she could, freely and without fear, one day say yes to. Chapter 3. Cracks in the Armor. Olivia Brennan should have been paying attention to Lady Ashton. The hostess spoke animatedly about the upcoming opera of the season, her hands moving with practiced elegance, while Charlotte and Beatrice listened with devoted interest. But Olivia's thoughts, restless, disobedient things, kept drifting back to the man standing on the opposite side of the room. She didn't need to look to know where he was. She felt him. Leonard Hawke had that inconvenient gift, occupying space even while perfectly still, altering the air around him, making it denser, sharper, harder to ignore. But today, I made an exception. His words returned with unexpected force. Our Duke, a man who could choose any drawing room in London, had attended this tea knowing she would be here. The thought could have been flattering, it could have been alarming. Olivia decided it was irritating. Miss Brennan, Lady Ashton's voice called her back. Your sister mentioned that your father loved literature. I imagine you inherited his taste. Olivia shaped the polite smile expected of her. Yes, Lady Ashton. My father believed reading built one's character. How charming. The hostess touched her arm, lowering her voice into confidential tones. And allow me to say, your conduct last night was admirable. To remain faithful to mourning when so many would have yielded to the temptation of a waltz with the Duke. Her eyes gleamed. That reveals strength. Heat rose along Olivia's neck. So it was true. Her refusal had spread through the city. I only did what seemed appropriate, she replied. Naturally, Lady Ashton's smile turned almost mischievous. Between us, the Duke has grown far too accustomed to getting whatever he wants. A little resistance may do him good." Before Olivia could answer, a maid approached with a silver tray of correspondence. Lady Ashton sifted through the envelopes until she brightened. "Ah, perfect. Invitations for the Wexford ball." She beamed at the three sisters. "It would be an honor to include your names." Charlotte and Beatrice lit up immediately. Olivia hesitated. More salons meant more eyes, more whispers, more opportunities to cross paths with Leonard Hawke. "Olivia," Charlotte touched her arm, "you don't have to dance, just come with us." The hope in her sister's eyes was so earnest that refusing would have been cruelty. "It will be a pleasure, Lady Ashton." As the conversation resumed its natural course, Olivia allowed herself a discreet glance around the room. She found Leonard speaking with Lord Pemberton, teacup in hand. From afar he looked relaxed, but small signs betrayed the facade, the tense line of his jaw, the faint drumming of his fingers, and his eyes. When they met hers, even for an instant, there was something there beyond idle amusement. There was intensity. There was intent. It should have frightened her. Instead, something unfurled inside her, a delicate curiosity, tinged with apprehension. Olivia snapped her fan closed with more force than intended. She could not afford distractions. Not when Hartwell would soon make decisions about the railways without consulting her. Not when her sisters depended on her to navigate the season without scandal. Not when grief still hung over her, like a shroud no one had taught her to remove. The tea ended about an hour later. As they bid farewell to Lady Ashton, Olivia caught sight of Leonard approaching in her peripheral vision. She steadied herself, but he merely inclined his head in a flawless gesture of respect. His eyes held hers for a single charged second before he stepped aside. No words, no attempt to detain her, and strangely, that unsettled her even more. Inside the carriage, Charlotte held her composure for as long as she could, which was not long at all. "Livy, did you see? The Duke hardly took his eyes off you." "Charlotte, please." Olivia adjusted her gloves, focusing on the passing streets beyond the window. "But it's true." Beatrice leaned closer, bright with excitement. "And last night, oh, he definitely reacted to your refusal. It was almost—" "Dukes do not allow themselves to be shaken," Olivia cut in, sharper than intended. "They consider it a minor inconvenience and look for another distraction." The sisters exchanged a silent glance. Charlotte slipped her hand into Olivia's. "You know you don't have to remain alone forever, don't you? Father wouldn't have wanted that." The mention of her father landed like a blade. Olivia turned back to the grey, smoke-softened streets of London. "I have you two," she murmured. "That's different," Charlotte said softly. "You take care of everything, Livy. You always have. Who takes care of you?" Olivia didn't answer. Since their mother's death 16 years earlier, she had learned to be the steady one, the calm one. When their father fell ill, she held the household together, while silently splintering inside. Caring for others was the role the world had given her. And she fulfilled it. Allowing someone, especially a dangerous duke with gold-flecked eyes, to see beneath that armor was a risk she could not afford. Even if a small, stubborn part of her wondered what it might feel like, if only for a moment, to let the armor slip. The carriage stopped before their Bloomsbury home. The sisters stepped out, the whisper of silk trailing into the cool air. Olivia followed. But the morning was not finished with her yet. The moment she entered the vestibule, she saw him. Mr. Hartwell waited, hat in hand, expression grave. "Miss Brennan," he said with practiced reverence, "we must discuss the urgent decisions regarding the new railway lines." Olivia straightened her shoulders, the familiar mask of competence settling over her. "Of course, Mr. Hartwell." But as she followed him down the corridor, something warm, insistent, and unwelcome lingered in her chest, like the memory of golden eyes still watching her from somewhere far behind. Leonard Hawke was a distraction she could not allow, even if he seemed determined not to remain where he belonged, at a distance. Chapter 4. The Game Changes. Leonard Hawke was not a man prone to obsessions, or at least he liked to believe he wasn't. And yet, While he signed a thick stack of documents in his study 3 days after Lady Ashton's tea, he found that between one figure and the next, the image returning to him was not of railway maps or profit projections, but of steady brown eyes that had met his calmly and declined him with impeccable grace, irritating, fascinating, dangerously inappropriate for a man who had always kept his heart safely distant from anything resembling real attachment. "Your Grace." Whitmore's voice sliced through the quiet. "Mr. Cornelius Hartwell is here for the meeting regarding the railway investments." Leonard straightened in his chair, forcing his mind back toward what should matter. Railways were the fever of the age. They said the future of England would run across steel lines connecting London to the industrial north. He had invested a considerable sum in that vision. "Show him in." Hartwell entered with the precise posture of a man who lived surrounded by contracts and clauses. Middle-aged, with grey brushing his temples, he carried a thick portfolio and the expression of someone who did not waste time. "Your Grace." He offered the correct bow before taking a seat. "Whitmore mentioned some urgency," Leonard said. "There are problems with the project?" "Not problems exactly, Your Grace." Hartwell set the portfolio on the desk. "Rather opportunities." The clasps opened with careful clicks, revealing documents arranged with meticulous order. "I am the appointed administrator of the estate left by Henry Brennan, deceased nearly a year ago. He invested a substantial sum in this same railway project. A chance has arisen to expand that participation, and as the executor, I must consult the major investors before committing additional funds." A single surname made the air shift. Brennan. Leonard's attention sharpened like a blade. "The heirs," he remarked evenly. 3 daughters, if I recall." "Correct, Your Grace." Hartwell checked a note out of habit. "Miss Olivia, 24. Her sisters, Charlotte at 21 and Beatrice at 19. Mr. Brennan built a respectable fortune through trade and remarkably well-chosen ventures. Unfortunately, he left no male heir." "And Miss Olivia?" Leonard twirled his pen between his fingers, casual on the surface, alert beneath. "How does the eldest view these decisions?" Hartwell hesitated. A flicker of discomfort crossed his face. "Miss Brennan is intelligent." A brief pause. "Perhaps more than would be convenient. Her father included her in business discussions, an unusual practice for a lady. She has firm opinions." "Opinions you consider reasonable?" Leonard lifted his gaze over the pen. "Most of the time, surprisingly sound." A fleeting, almost embarrassed smile escaped him. "But my duty is to protect the sisters' interests. That means making decisions a young lady, no matter how well instructed, has no real experience to evaluate." Leonard's fingers stilled. So Olivia Brennan was not merely the woman who had refused him before half of London. She was someone who understood figures, risks, projections, someone trained to sit at the table, yet forced to remain outside it. No wonder she carried that weight in her shoulders. No wonder her gaze held that quiet fatigue. "The Brennan investments are solid." His tone was pragmatic, but something else lay beneath it. Extremely. Hartwell leaned forward, animated now that the subject returned to safer ground. "He had a rare instinct for profitable opportunities, and that is why I seek your counsel. If we increase the share now, the Brennan sisters' future will be even more secure, but I need the approval of major investors." Leonard drew the documents toward him. Numbers, projections, returns. The decision was clear, but his mind worked on 2 levels. The expansion itself was excellent, and at the same time it created a tangible connection with the heiress who could not sit at the table, though she would inevitably know every approved line. "I agree to the expansion," he signed with decisive strokes. "Brennan's investments are clearly well structured. It would be unwise to ignore the opportunity." Hartwell's relief was immediate. "Miss Brennan will be pleased." "She defended this exact proposal last week." Leonard lifted a brow. "She defended it?" "With figures, projections, comparative risk analysis." Hartwell gave a short, incredulous laugh. "The young lady has a head for business that would shame many gentlemen. Her father trained her well, if unconventionally." A warmth settled in Leonard's chest, a pride that was not his to claim, yet existed all the same. Pride in her clarity, her courage to argue for a place she was denied. And absurdly, he found himself wishing she were here, defending those numbers before him rather than from a distance. "Is there anything else, Hartwell?" "Yes, Your Grace." The administrator opened another folder. "There will be a meeting with the main investors next week to discuss the next steps. Your presence would be most valuable." He would have attended anyway. Now, however, the prospect held a different color entirely. "I will be there." A brief pause. "Does Miss Brennan typically follow these decisions?" The discomfort returned, casting a shadow across Hartwell's face. She expressed a desire to attend. Adjusting his spectacles, he added, "But it would be inappropriate. Business meetings are not the place for ladies." Leonard kept his expression controlled, but something cold, clean, lit inside him. Olivia Brennan, with her trained mind, her calculations, her sharp clarity, forced to remain in Bloomsbury, while a circle of men determined the fate of the estate her father built. No wonder she looked at the world with that mix of restraint and exhaustion. "I understand," he said quietly. Minutes later, Hartwell departed, leaving folders and formal gratitude behind. When the door closed, the silence felt heavier. Leonard rose and moved to the window. The garden stretched below in warm afternoon light, but it was Olivia who filled his thoughts. This was not mere desire, nor the wounded curiosity of a man unused to hearing no. It was recognition. He had spent years performing the role expected of him, the charming, untouchable Duke. She had spent years managing a household, protecting sisters, balancing accounts, carrying grief, while society insisted on treating her as a decorative afterthought. Two types of prisons, two different armors. Perhaps, he thought with a calm that surprised him, there was something in Olivia Brennan no game could reach. Something he did not want simply to win, but to understand. A slow, involuntary smile touched his lips. She had said no because she was tired of games. Then he would not play. He would be honest, he would be patient, and above all he would prove worthy of the trust she did not grant easily. Winning her, if he ever earned the right, would not come from title or charm, but from showing that he saw the woman behind the armor, and that he did not fear the strength he found there. The game had changed, and Leonard Hawke had never been the kind of man to retreat from a challenge that truly mattered. Chapter 5. Unwilling Trust. Olivia knew she ought to feel grateful. Mr. Say. Hartwell had just announced that the railway expansion had been approved, exactly what she had argued for a week earlier, armed with numbers, projections, and reports he had listened to with his usual condescending patience. And yet, seated in the study that had once belonged to her father, hearing Hartwell attribute the decision to the wisdom of the principal investors, especially the Duke of Leinster, what Olivia felt was far closer to fury than gratitude. "The Duke was exceedingly receptive to the proposal, Miss Brennan," Hartwell said, stacking papers with visible satisfaction. "His approval ensured the others followed. It was a stroke of luck having him as an ally on this project." "Luck," Olivia repeated, with a calmness that thinly veiled the fire beneath. "And the analyses I prepared, the feasibility reports, those carried no weight in the decision." Hartwell blinked, uneasy. "Your reports were helpful, certainly." He smoothed his moustache, choosing each word as though navigating thin ice. "But the Duke of Leicester's endorsement carries a weight numbers alone cannot. That is the way of the business world, my dear." "My dear." The endearment slid like acid. Olivia felt her fingers curl tightly in her lap. She was 24, with a mind her father had once called sharp as a blade, and yet she continued to be treated as a child in need of protection from matters she understood better than many men at the table. And the fact that Leonard Hawke, the very man she was determined to keep at arm's length, was now central to her family's financial future, only made it more unbearable. "There will be a meeting next Tuesday," Hartwell continued, oblivious to the storm gathering behind her composed expression. "All major investors will attend. Naturally, you need not trouble yourself with such details. I shall handle everything." "Naturally." Olivia curved her lips in a smile that did not reach her eyes. It would be improper for a lady to concern herself with her own estate. Sarcasm dripped from each syllable. Whether he heard it or not, Hartwell looked almost reassured. "Precisely, Miss Brennan. Your father entrusted me with safeguarding his daughter's interests, and I take that duty most seriously." When the door finally closed behind him, the silence in the study felt larger than the room itself. Frustration burned in Olivia's chest like embers refusing to die. She rose and walked to the shelf where her father kept his accounting books. Running her fingers along the worn spines, she recognized by texture alone volumes she had opened countless times. Henry Brennan had taught her to read numbers before letters. He had placed her at the business table the moment she could add and subtract without error. Now, with him gone, the knowledge he gave her was treated as an inconvenient curiosity. Improper, nearly indecent. The door opened softly and Charlotte entered carrying a tray of tea. "I thought you might need this." Olivia exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she held and accepted the cup. "Thank you." Charlotte sat across from her, watching with that delicate clarity she had always possessed. "Hartwell brought good news." She tilted her head. "You should be radiant." "I should." Olivia sipped the tea, using its warmth as an anchor. "But it's difficult to feel joy when your ideas are used, and the credit is handed to men who merely signed their names. So the Duke of Leinster approved the investment?" Even hearing his name tightened something in Olivia's chest. Keeping her expression steady, she nodded. Apparently his approval was decisive. Hartwell spoke of him as if he were some saint of commerce. Charlotte fell quiet, turning her teacup between her fingers. "You know he'll be at the Wexford ball tomorrow night." Of course he would. Recently, wherever duty led her, Leonard Hawke seemed to stand only a few steps ahead, or beside her. "Half of London will be at the Wexford ball," she replied, setting her cup down. "That's hardly a revelation." "Livy." Charlotte leaned forward, voice soft but firm. "Why are you so afraid of this man?" "I'm not afraid." The answer came too quickly, too sharply. Olivia closed her eyes briefly, inhaled, and corrected herself. "It isn't fear. I simply don't trust men like him. Men used to getting everything they want. Men who look at women and see diversions, or conquests. But what if he isn't like that?" Charlotte pressed her hand over Olivia's. "What if he is in truth trying to know you?" Olivia let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "Men like the Duke of Leinster do not wake up suddenly transformed into romantic heroes, Charlotte. He is bored, and I had the misfortune of being the only woman in London who refused him. That makes me a passing challenge, nothing more." The words were steady, but there was a fracture in them. Because when she closed her eyes, Olivia didn't see only Leonard's practiced smile. She saw the shadow of something deeper behind it. As if, for one fleeting instant, he had seen all of her, not just the role society insisted she played. The thought was unsettling, and somewhere deep inside dangerously tempting. "Just promise me one thing," Charlotte insisted. "Speak with him, honestly, without games. If afterward you still find him unworthy of trust, I'll help you keep him away myself." Olivia didn't answer immediately. Part of her wanted him as far away as possible. Another part, small, stubborn, wanted to know what would happen if, just once, she stopped retreating. That night, alone in her room, Olivia stared at the gown laid out for the Wexford ball. Suitable for light mourning, soft lavender and ivory without excessive shine, yet more elegant than anything she had worn since abandoning full black. Charlotte had insisted, claiming their father had not raised her to live half her life in shadows. Olivia smoothed the fabric with her fingertips. Inevitably, her mind drifted to golden eyes and smiles that seemed to conceal more than they revealed. Leonard Hawke had approved the investment she had defended. Coincidence? Calculation? Or it is some quiet form of respect? She dismissed the idea with a small shake of her head. She could not allow curiosity, or anything akin to it, to cloud her judgment. She had sisters depending on her, an estate she could protect only within the limits of the law, and a grief that still demanded reverence. There was no room in her carefully ordered life for dangerous dukes and the confusion of feelings they brought. Even so, sleep came slowly, and in the hazy space between waking and dreaming, Olivia wondered what it might be like to accept a single dance. Not with any gentleman, but with the man whose golden eyes watched her as if she were a riddle he had decided to solve. Would it be a betrayal of her mourning, or the first small trembling step towards something she did not yet know she desired? The question lingered unanswered in the dark. The next morning, a knock at the door and hurried footsteps announced the arrival of a messenger. Moments later, a letter lay on Olivia's desk. She recognized Hartwell's seal and broke it, expecting another list of decisions made without her participation, but the contents made her pause. Miss Brennan, after renewed discussion with the principal investors, including His Grace the Duke of Leinster, certain adjustments to the railway expansion have been suggested, which I believe to be of particular interest to you. Before the formal meeting, I would value your opinion on these alterations. If you prefer, you may send your thoughts in writing. I must add that His Grace expressed appreciation for your previous technical analysis and declared he would consider it most valuable at this stage as well. Respectfully, Cornelius Hartwell Olivia read the letter once, twice, 3 times. The Duke of Leinster wanted her perspective. A duke, accustomed to being the final word, wished to read the opinion of a woman on investments. It could be a tactic. It could be the start of a subtler game. But for the first time since her father's death, someone, however indirectly, had put into writing that her mind held value. With slightly trembling fingers, Olivia reached for paper and pen. If Leonard Hawke wanted her analysis, she would give it. With clarity, with logic, with the same steady honesty with which she had refused him at the ball. And in doing so, she might discover whether his interest was only another well-polished mask, or whether there was, in those golden eyes, something as real as it was dangerous. Either way, the Wexford ball promised to be far more interesting than she would ever admit aloud. Chapter 6. A Hesitant Surrender. Leonard Hawke arrived at the Wexford ball with a clear purpose. The house, flooded with light, looked more like a stage than a residence. Crystal chandeliers scattered golden reflections over silk and jewels. The ballroom hummed with laughter, music and expectation. On any other night, it would have been the sort of event he endured with elegant detachment, playing his part while his mind wandered elsewhere. Tonight was different. Somewhere in that crowd was the woman who had invaded his thoughts with unsettling frequency, the same woman who had sent him a long, precise analysis of the railway investments. He had read every line more than once. There was clarity, logic, and a strategic vision that rivaled that of seasoned businessmen. Olivia Brennan was not merely intelligent, she was brilliant, and to society's narrow eyes, she was only an heiress in need of a suitable marriage. "Leinster," Lord Wexford's voice sounded at his side, cordial and curious. "What an honour to have you at our humble gathering. Are you looking for someone in particular?" Leonard arranged the polished smile he had worn so many times without effort. "Merely enjoying your excellent hospitality, Wexford." But his gaze was already scanning the room, and then he saw her. Near the windows, bathed in the light of a great chandelier, stood Olivia. She was speaking with Charlotte, and a gentleman Leonard did not recognize. Her gown, in soft shades of lavender and ivory, still honoured mourning, yet gently restored a forgotten glow to her. Light caught in her brown hair, drawn up in an elegant arrangement, and when she laughed at something her sister said, a small, unguarded sound, Leonard felt his chest tighten. A thought came to him, simple and devastating. I want to be the reason she smiles like that. The realization struck hard. This was not a game of conquest, nor the whim of a bored man. It was a sincere desire for what lay behind that expression, for her mind, her honesty, her contained strength. When, in the name of reason, had that begun? He crossed the ballroom toward her with the habitual confidence of a man accustomed to being watched. But for the first time in many years, the weight of others' eyes meant nothing. What mattered was the subtle tension that appeared in her shoulders when she noticed his approach. "Miss Brennan." "Miss Charlotte." He offered the proper bow and then turned fully to Olivia. "I received your observations on the railway project. I must say they were remarkable." She lifted her chin, her eyes guarded. "Your Grace is exceedingly kind." "This is not kindness." His voice remained low, aware of listening ears nearby. "Your considerations about the secondary routes were particularly insightful. I intend to present them at Tuesday's meeting." He saw it. Surprise crossed her features too quickly to be hidden. A flicker immediately contained, but not swift enough to escape his trained gaze. It was painfully clear she had not expected to be taken so seriously, and the fact that this was a surprise to her disturbed him more than he had anticipated. For the first time, Olivia seemed to lack a ready answer. "I am honored, Your Grace." It is unusual for anyone to consider the views of someone with no formal standing. Formal standing? A faint smile touched his lips. "Miss Brennan, your analysis shows an understanding many gentlemen with decades of formal standing never achieve. Ignoring such intelligence merely because it comes from an unexpected source would be unforgivably foolish." Charlotte watched them with bright eyes, a silence that felt almost like blessing. Olivia, on the other hand, was clearly fighting an inner battle, visible in the tight grip on her fan and the faint flush creeping up her neck. Before he could allow courage to slip away, a feeling still unfamiliar to Leonard Hawke, he heard himself ask, "May I have the honor of this dance, Miss Brennan?" He saw the refusal form in her eyes. It was almost reflexive. Defense, habit, a wall. Her lips began to shape the no he already knew. Then something shifted. Perhaps it was the memory of seeing her ideas echoed at a table of powerful men. Perhaps it was the rare taste of being acknowledged not as an heiress, but as a mind of use. Olivia drew a deep breath, and when she raised her gaze, there was in it a cautious surrender. Not complete, but enough. "Yes, Your Grace." Her voice was low, steady. It would be an honor. Leonard was certain surprise showed on his face, because a small, almost shy yet genuine smile curved her lips. As he offered his arm and felt her gloved fingers rest on the fabric of his coat, he knew with odd certainty that something had shifted between them. The waltz began at the precise moment they took their places. Leonard's hand found her waist at the proper, respectable point. The contact, despite the layers of fabric, felt far more intense than it should have. His other hand closed around hers, light yet firm, and then they moved. Olivia danced with quiet grace. She did not have the rehearsed display of some debutantes, but there was a natural balance in her steps, as if her mind were calculating the rhythm even as her body followed it. "You are receiving more attention than you would like," he murmured, without breaking her gaze. "One grows used to it." Her tone was calm, tinged with irony. "Ever since I refused you that night, I seem to have become a favorite topic in many drawing rooms. Do you regret it?" He held her eyes. "The refusal?" Her brown gaze met his with the frankness he was beginning to recognize as uniquely hers. "I do not regret the refusal itself." She drew in a slow breath. "But perhaps I have regretted judging your intentions before I understood them. My intentions." He let the words rest between them. "You believed it was a simple whim." "I did." The corner of her mouth twitched in something close to a humorless smile. A bored duke in search of diversion. "Your regard for my work, however, has forced me to question that judgment." He did not enjoy the sharp tug in his chest, hearing his own image reflected back at him so plainly. Yet he admired with equal force the courage it took to say such things in the middle of a dance floor. "It was not whim, Miss Brennan." His voice came lower. "When you refused my invitation, I saw more than a no. I saw someone who does not bend to convenience when she knows what is right." Later I had the privilege of seeing the mind that sustains that stance, and I wanted to know it better, not as a prize, as a person. He felt her fingers tremble in his. Her fan, held slightly back, wavered almost imperceptibly. "Your Grace." "Leonard." He turned her gently, drawing her a fraction closer, only enough to feel her breath brush his jaw. "If ever, under circumstances less observed than these, you allow me a truly honest conversation, I must ask that you call me Leonard." Olivia remained silent for several measures. The world around them kept spinning. Silk, gold, murmurs. But to him, nothing beyond their small circle seemed to exist. At last, she whispered, so softly it was nearly swallowed by the music. Perhaps in letters, or in private conversation. A brief pause. But only if, under those same circumstances, I may be simply Olivia. Not Miss Brennan, not anyone's heiress. Just myself. The smile that escaped Leonard was so unguarded it almost startled him. Olivia. He spoke her name as if trying its weight. That is a bargain I accept with gratitude. They continued to dance, and the steps grew dangerously natural. Leonard noticed everything. The tiny, almost invisible mark near her temple, the way she bit her lower lip just lightly when she thought, the discreet lavender scent that reached him each time she moved closer. "May I confess something?" His voice sounded more bare than he intended. "That sounds dangerously tempting." A glimmer of humor lit her eyes. I confess, entirely out of familiar territory." He let out a breath, as if finally admitting something to himself. "I have spent years managing masks, keeping a safe distance from everything and everyone. With you, I do not quite know how to do that. I do not know how to play. You disarm me, and I have not yet decided whether I ought to fear or thank you for it." She held his gaze for several seconds, too long to be mere politeness. Leonard did not look away, allowing her to see what he rarely let surface. At last, a small, quiet smile softened her features. "Perhaps both, Your Grace." Her brows lifted just slightly. "Perhaps it is fitting to feel a little fear and a little gratitude when something truly important begins to happen." She hesitated then, minimal, almost imperceptible, before adding, "My father used to say that when he spoke of Tuscany, of the hills he longed to see with us one day." Her smile shifted, gentler, more intimate. "He always believed certain places have the power to reveal who we really are." The words settled on Leonard like something precious. He did not press, would not dare, but he stored each syllable, each nuance, the way one keeps a promise never explicitly made. The music began to soften, drawing them back to the ballroom. Leonard released her hand reluctantly, stepping away just enough to offer the final bow. Every inch of distance felt greater than propriety required. When he lifted his gaze again, he found hers, and something had changed there. It was not full surrender, it was not a promise, but there was a new trust, fragile and real, curiosity, unfeigned, and the outline of a beginning neither of them had consciously sought. He led her back to Charlotte, inclining his head in a farewell that to careless onlookers would seem nothing more than correct courtesy. To Leonard, it marked a boundary. There was life before that waltz, and everything after. As Olivia rejoined her sisters, he felt with disarming clarity that he had crossed a point of no return. For the first time in many years, he was not hiding behind empty charm, nor fleeing at the first hint of true intimacy. He was moving, carefully, yes, but deliberately, toward the only thing in a very long time that had seemed worth the risk. A woman who saw him without the armor of the impeccable Duke, and who, little by little, was beginning to allow him to see her without hers. Chapter 7. The Risk of Truth. Olivia could not stop thinking about the dance. 3 days had passed since the Wexford ball, and still all it took was a moment of carelessness for her to feel it again. The ghost of Leonard's hand at her waist, the restrained warmth of his touch, the low timbre of his voice saying her name with an intimacy that had made her tremble. Olivia, not Miss Brennan, not the responsible daughter, the grieving heiress, the guardian of everyone. Just Olivia, a woman with her own desires and fears. It was dangerous, it was tempting, and she did not know which of the two unsettled her more. "Livy, you haven't touched your tea." Charlotte's voice pulled her back into the morning room. Gentle light filtered through the windows, reflecting softly off pale wallpaper. Beatrice sat by the window embroidering. Charlotte, in an armchair, pretended to read a book she had not turned the page of in several minutes. "Sorry. I was distracted." Olivia picked up her teacup, attempting a smile. Her sisters knew that smile too well to believe it. "Distracted? Thinking about a certain golden-eyed Duke?" Beatrice asked, without looking up from her needlework, though the smile tugging at her lips betrayed her. Heat crept up Olivia's neck. "I haven't the slightest idea what you mean." "Livy," Charlotte said gently, leaning forward, "half of London saw you two dancing, and the other half has already heard from those who did. You looked alone together, as if the rest of the ballroom had vanished." It wasn't a lie. For those few minutes, the world had shrunk to a pair of gold eyes, a steady hand, and honest words that cracked the defenses she had built so carefully. When he had admitted to being out of his element, vulnerable, uncertain, something inside her had begun, dangerously, to soften. Before she could answer, a maid entered carrying a silver tray. "Correspondence for you, Miss Brennan." Olivia recognized the seal immediately, a ducal crest pressed into red wax. Her hands betrayed a small tremor as she broke it open, aware of her sister's collective silence. "Miss Brennan, I hope you will forgive the boldness of this more personal note, but after our conversation at the Wexford ball, excessive formalities seem inappropriate. Tomorrow, the Royal Academy will present an exhibition of Italian paintings. I recall hearing you speak of Tuscany and wondered if you might enjoy seeing works by the great masters of that land. Lady Ashton, with great kindness, has offered to accompany you, and it would be a profound honor if you would allow me to join you both. This is not a light attempt at conquest, but a sincere invitation from someone who truly values your company and your conversation, and who wishes to know you better, somewhere beyond the constant theatre of the ballroom." With deepest regard, Leinster Olivia read it once, then again. By the third time her heart was beating faster. He remembered. He remembered the almost embarrassed comment she had made about dreaming of Italy one day. He remembered her father showing her books of landscapes. Leonard had not merely heard the words, he had understood the space between them. "Well," Charlotte finally burst, unable to wait. "What does it say?" "He invites me to an art exhibition, with Lady Ashton as chaperone." Olivia handed them the letter, something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Hope, perhaps, or fear of it. Beatrice read over Charlotte's shoulder. When they finished, both turned to Olivia with a blend of excitement and caution. "Are you going to accept?" Charlotte asked softly. Olivia stood and walked to the window. Outside, London moved along in its usual rhythm, carriages, voices, chimney smoke. The city seemed indifferent to the small revolutions taking place in a Bloomsbury drawing room. To accept meant admitting, even if only to herself, that Leonard Hawke was not merely distraction or danger. It meant acknowledging that something in her leaned toward him, curiosity slipping into attraction, reluctant respect beginning to color itself with admiration. But it also meant risk. The risk of feeling something for a man so deeply it could break her. The risk of loosening, even for an instant, the discipline that had kept her upright. The risk of ceasing to be only a fortress and becoming simply a woman. "Sometimes I wonder if I still have the right to want anything that isn't duty," she murmured, more to the glass than to her sisters. "Oh, Livy." Charlotte rose and hugged her gently from behind. "You've spent your whole life taking care of everyone, of father when he was ill, of us, of the house. Of the business they allowed you scraps of. When is it someone else's turn to take care of you?" The words struck a place so deep, Olivia almost stepped back from instinct. She had buried the desire to be seen, not for what she carried, but for who she was. And Leonard, with his frank truths and eyes that seemed to see past her mask, offered precisely that temptation. "What if I get hurt?" she whispered. "What if you don't?" Beatrice joined them, placing a hand on her sister's arm. "What if, for once, it is different? What if he isn't genuine?" Olivia closed her eyes. She allowed herself to imagine, just for a moment, afternoons in museums discussing paintings, conversations where her opinion was not tolerated but desired, looks that warmed rather than weighed her down. It was terrifying, and in a cruel way, irresistible. Suddenly she realized the decision had already been made. Fear was merely delaying the admission. The next afternoon the carriage took her to Lady Ashton's home. Her stomach tightened with every turned street, though she could not tell whether it was anxiety or anticipation. The matron welcomed her with warm enthusiasm. "My dear Miss Brennan, what a pleasure to accompany you today. Her eyes sparkled with something between affection and knowing mischief. "The Duke of Leinster is already on his way to the Royal Academy. We thought it more appropriate to meet him there." Olivia nodded gratefully. No gossip about sharing a carriage, only a chaperone escorting a young lady. When they arrived, Leonard was waiting at the entrance, dressed in a dark coat, posture impeccable. But when his eyes met Olivia's, there was something less polished there, something human, a spark of nervousness only she might notice. "Lady Ashton, Miss Brennan," he bowed perfectly. "It is an honor to have you both here." "The honor is ours, Your Grace." Lady Ashton smiled. "If you will excuse me, I must greet Lady Pemberton. Start ahead, I won't be far." A transparent maneuver, but socially flawless. She would remain nearby, close enough for propriety, distant enough for honesty. Leonard offered his arm. Olivia accepted, feeling the solid warmth beneath the fabric. "You look lovely," he murmured, low enough for only her. "And a little tense." "I am." The truth escaped before she could dress it in irony. "All of this is new to me, allowing myself to want something. Someone." She felt his arm stiffen for the briefest moment. "Then we are in similar circumstances," he said, with a brief smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "If it helps, I am far from at ease. I would say, rather anxious." Olivia looked up, genuinely surprised. "You?" "Entirely." The smile that followed was unguarded, startlingly sincere. "Because this, with you, is not a game, Olivia, and I have never learned how to do anything that wasn't one." Her name, spoken like that, stirred something deep inside her. They stopped before a wide canvas, golden hills, long shadows, cypress trees cutting into the horizon. Olivia held her breath. "Do you recognize the style?" he asked, more to watch her reaction than to get an answer. She nodded lightly. "Yes." "My father liked landscapes like this." Her voice was calm, too calm, as if she were pushing the memories back into their quiet box. Leonard understood, and respected the silence. He didn't press. "They are Italian lands, aren't they?" she said softly. "Tuscany." His voice was warm. "A singular light, a clear sky, a land made to reveal truths." Her gaze remained on the painting, as if drinking its radiance. She said nothing about the dreams cut short, the promise she once mentioned. He felt the absence mount, yet did not demand she fill it. "Olivia," he said finally, with a sincerity he had not planned, "there are places that wait for the right person to be seen." She turned to him. The grief was better hidden this time, but not unreachable. "May I speak with complete honesty?" she asked. "With you," he replied, "always. For the first time in many years, I can imagine a future that doesn't feel hollow." Her voice was low but heavy with truth. "I can imagine traveling not out of duty but desire, with someone who sees beauty in the same places, someone whose mind fascinates me as much as his face, someone who makes me want to be a better man than I have been." Olivia's heart struck violently in her chest. "You barely know me," she whispered. "That is true." He tilted his head slightly. "That is why I am here, to know you." Only then did she realize they had wandered to a quieter end of the gallery. Others were near enough for propriety. Lady Ashton could see them if she wished, but the small alcove created the illusion of a world reduced to two. "Let me know the woman who writes analyses that make lawyers blush," he continued softly, "who protects her sisters with a loyalty many men lack for their own brothers, who holds her head high in a world determined to treat her as fragile. Let me know, Olivia, not only Miss Brennan." She looked at him, truly looked. Beyond the impeccable Duke, she saw weariness, hope, and a fear very much like her own. "I'm afraid," she confessed, "afraid of feeling more than is sensible." "So am I," he answered, without hesitation. "But I have learned I would rather fear something real than feel safe in emptiness." For a moment the sound of the gallery fell away. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull back, Leonard stepped closer. Not enough for scandal, but enough that she felt the warmth of him. He took her gloved hand and brought it to his lips. The gesture socially was irreproachable, a kiss on the back of the hand. But he lingered a fraction too long, eyes closing for a single heartbeat, turning courtesy into something deeper, something only they could read. To the world, politeness, to her an earthquake. Heat rushed through her, settling in her chest like a tremor without name. When he released her hand, Olivia curled her fingers slightly, as if trying to keep the memory within her palm. "You are extraordinary, Olivia Brennan," he murmured, voice hushed, slightly unsteady. "And I will do all I can to be worthy of the trust you grant me, however small." "You already are," she answered before caution could stop her, "by being honest, by seeing me as I truly am. That is more than I ever expected to find." As if the moment had been timed, Lady Ashton appeared at the entrance. "Oh, I see you discovered the Italian landscapes." She smiled, eyes far too perceptive. "Aren't they magnificent?" The spell broke, but did not vanish. The rest of the visit passed with ease. They spoke of paintings, laughed at pompous portraits, listened to Lady Ashton's witty observations. Yet what had been said, and what remained unsaid, in that quiet alcove hovered between them like a silent promise. At the Royal Academy's doors during their farewell, Leonard held her hand a second longer than propriety required. "May I hope to see you again soon?" he asked, courage and vulnerability threading his voice. Olivia felt her smile rise unbidden. "Yes," she said softly. "I would like that very much." On the carriage ride back to Bloomsbury, Lady Ashton studied her for a moment before speaking, a satisfied smile at her lips. "He is a good man, my dear," she said kindly. "Deeper than he allows society to see. I believe you've noticed that." "I have." Olivia looked toward the window, but the reflection in the glass could not hide the light in her eyes. "And that frightens me more than anything." "True affection often does," Lady Ashton replied gently. "But when it is genuine, it is usually worth the fear." Olivia did not correct the word affection. She did not say that perhaps, dangerously, it was already becoming something greater. She only knew that somewhere between grief and this new, trembling fear, something delicate had begun to bloom. And for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to wonder whether perhaps, just perhaps, it was not wrong to want it to grow. Chapter 8. The Inevitable Promise. Leonard Hawke knew he was lost. 5 days had passed since that afternoon at the Royal Academy, and he could still feel with uncomfortable clarity the warmth of Olivia's skin beneath his lips when he kissed her hand. In any other circumstance, it would have been a courteous, almost trivial gesture. With her in that quiet wing under filtered light, it had felt like a promise. He had seen the pulse race beneath his touch. He had seen the mixture of vulnerability and hope in her eyes when she told him he was already worthy, simply for being honest. No one had ever made him feel that way before, seen. Not as a duke, not as a fortune. As a man, with flaws, fears, and possibilities. "Your Grace." Whitmore's voice cut through his thoughts. "Mr. Hartwell has arrived for the investors' meeting. The other gentlemen are already waiting in the conference room." Leonard straightened in his chair. The railway expansion meeting was important, not only for the numbers, but because every decision made there would shape Olivia's and her sister's financial future, and he was fully aware of that. He had spent the last few nights rereading the analyses she had prepared, line by line, nearly memorizing arguments that, in truth, should have been presented by her. If the world refused to give her a seat at the table, he could at least make her voice echo inside that room. The conference room was already full when he entered. 6 of the main investors, among them Lord Pemberton and Sir William Ashcroft, sat around the polished mahogany table. At the head, Hartwell was arranging papers with his usual precision, though there was a certain tightness in his posture. "Gentlemen," Leonard greeted, taking his place. The meeting began. For an hour, they discussed projections, costs, returns. The expansion proposal, including the secondary routes Olivia had so carefully identified, was solid, but demanded a considerable amount of additional capital. "It's risky," Sir William grumbled, flipping through the reports. "Committing more funds when we haven't yet fully recouped the first investment. With all due respect, Sir William," Leonard replied, his tone courteous but firm. "The greater risk lies in hesitating. The analyses show that within 5 years, whoever controls the secondary routes will dominate transport over a vast region. If we don't occupy that space, someone else will." Lord Pemberton raised one of the reports, adjusting his monocle. "These studies are impressive, detailed, clear. Whoever prepared them has remarkable understanding of both technical and commercial aspects." Hartwell cleared his throat, shuffling papers. "They are the result of combined efforts, my lord." Leonard caught the hesitation. He knew exactly which combined efforts those were, and why Hartwell did not dare name them aloud. "Whoever it is," Leonard interjected, fixing Hartwell with a calm, deliberate look, "it's clear these sources deserve our continued attention. I suggest we keep consulting them. There's strategic insight here none of us should ignore." Hartwell looked up. For a brief moment, sincere gratitude crossed his features. In the end, the vote for expansion was unanimous. When the other investors had gone, Hartwell remained. Leonard dismissed Whitmore with a gesture and indicated the chair opposite him. "Your Grace," the administrator began, choosing his words with care, "I am grateful for your discretion. Miss Brennan is extraordinarily capable, but her position is delicate. Her father involved her in matters many would consider unsuitable for a lady. And yet," Leonard replied, leaning back slightly, "her abilities proved more valuable than those of many gentlemen present today." Hartwell let out a short sigh. "I agree entirely." He looked down at his hands. "But my responsibility is to protect her, and that includes her reputation. If it became public that she was so actively involved, the law was not made to recognize minds like hers," Leonard said quietly. He ran his fingers along the table's edge, thoughtful. "Hartwell, allow me a more personal question." "Of course, Your Grace." "Do you believe Miss Brennan would be capable of managing her own business alone if the law allowed it?" "Without the slightest doubt." There was not a moment of hesitation. "She has her father's instinct, plus greater discipline and prudence. In another world, she would have a career that eclipsed that of many men. In our world, unfortunately—" He made a small, helpless gesture. "Society barely tolerates her reading contracts. Imagine signing them." "And if," Leonard continued, "she had a husband who recognized that, who not only gave her space but trusted her with decisions, even if formally the control fell on him." Hartwell studied him for a moment. "That would be unusual, to say the least." A small smile appeared. "But not illegal, and from a business standpoint extremely advantageous." He paused significantly. "London, of course, would have plenty to say." "London always does," Leonard murmured. Then more clearly, "I am only considering that Miss Brennan is an extraordinary woman, and that it would be foolish to pretend I do not see that." "With all respect," Hartwell said gently, "Miss Brennan is not a woman who would accept a proposal based solely on convenience or calculation. She has a loyal heart and pride to match." "It would not be mere convenience, Hartwell." A slow smile curved Leonard's lips. "I give you my word on that." The administrator observed him a little longer, then inclined his head in a gesture that, coming from him, felt almost like a blessing. "Then, if my opinion matters at all, I would say I could not wish for a better match for the Mrs. Brennan. Mr. Brennan would rest easier knowing his daughters were in respectable hands, and rather rare ones." When Hartwell left, the silence in the office gained a different weight. Marriage. For years the very word had felt like a shackle, an inevitable obligation he deftly postponed. Now, with Olivia's name in his mind, the idea no longer sounded like a sell, but like a possibility of partnership, of evenings where conversation did not die in trivialities, of shared decisions, of seeing one day her dark eyes shining under the Tuscan sun before landscapes she now knew only from paintings. The decision took on a clear shape. But he knew he could not simply appear with a dramatic proposal, as so many would, assuming his title was enough. Olivia deserved to understand and to choose. She deserved to know that he saw all of her, intelligence, strength, fear, vulnerabilities, and that it was to that whole, not to a social role, that he wished to bind himself. He reached for paper and pen. For a time, no phrase seemed sufficient. In the end, he followed the instinct of simplicity. "Miss Brennan, I would be greatly honored to see you again. There is an important matter I wish to discuss, but it does not seem fitting to do so in a ballroom or public gallery. Would it be too bold to ask if you might permit me to call at your residence with your sisters present, of course? I promise not to abuse your trust, but would be deeply grateful if you granted me this opportunity." With all consideration, Leinster, he sealed the letter and gave it to the messenger, instructing him to wait for a reply. The time until the man returned felt longer than any parliamentary debate. The answer arrived 2 hours later. "Your Grace, we shall be at home tomorrow at 3 in the afternoon. You will be welcome. Sincerely, Olivia Brennan." He reread it twice. The salutation at the top was formal, the signature less so. Olivia Brennan. Not merely Miss Brennan, a small concession. Small, but eloquent. To Leonard's eyes, it was another crack in her carefully built armor. He promised himself, with a resolve that surprised him, that he would not waste that trust. The next morning he woke earlier than usual. Sleep had abandoned him at dawn, chased away by nerves and expectation. He dressed with uncommon care, not out of vanity, but respect. He wanted every detail to say what words could not, that he took this visit with absolute seriousness. At 2:30 he was already in the carriage bound for Bloomsbury. The Brennan house was exactly what he had imagined, elegant without ostentation, solid, practical, as if it reflected the mind that now managed its affairs. A prosperous merchant's home, more concerned with substance than display, the kind of place certain noble families would sneer at, the kind of house he in that moment found strangely right. A capable maid received him and led him to the drawing-room. Charlotte and Beatrice were waiting. They rose and curtsied gracefully. Their eyes, however, shone with barely concealed curiosity. "Your Grace," Charlotte said with a gentle smile, "it is an honor to have you in our home. Olivia will be down in a moment." He was still forming a reply when the door opened again. Olivia entered. She wore a soft shade of green that flattered the brown of her hair and the tone of her eyes. Her coiffure was simple, elegant, no excess, yet to Leonard nothing could have made her look more beautiful. "Your Grace." She curtsied, but her eyes held his a heartbeat longer than strict formality required. "It is very kind of you to visit us. The kindness is entirely mine in being received." He turned to the sisters. "Miss Charlotte, Miss Beatrice, with your permission I would like to speak with Miss Brennan privately for a few moments, with the doors open and you nearby, of course." The two exchanged a look that said more than any sentence, and Charlotte smiled, almost conspiratorial. "Of course, Your Grace. We shall be in the adjoining room. The corridor carries sound remarkably well." They withdrew with graceful speed. When they were alone, or as alone as propriety allowed, the weight of the moment settled between them. "Olivia," he began, seeing the faint shiver that ran through her at the sound of her name in his voice, "there are things I must say, and I ask only that you let me reach the end before you judge them." She nodded, hands clasped in front of her, as if anchoring herself. "I have spent many years playing a part," he said, his calm hiding the storm inside. "The part of the charming Duke, always pleasant, always superficial. It was comfortable and empty." He paused. "Until a certain young lady had the audacity to refuse a dance." A flicker of a smile crossed her face. "I had no idea my refusal would have such far-reaching consequences," she murmured. "It did." His eyes softened. "Because for the first time, someone looked at me and was not impressed by the title, not swept away by appearances. You saw me as a man, and for a moment I thought you found me lacking." "That was not it," she protested, blushing. "Perhaps not in those words," he conceded. "But that is how I felt, and for the first time I wanted to be more, not for London, not for reputation, for you." He took a step closer, careful. "When I saw your reasoning in those reports, I understood that your mind is as remarkable as your heart. When I watched you caring for your sisters, insisting on what is honorable even when tired, I saw strength. When, at the Royal Academy, I heard you admit fear and hope in the same breath, I saw courage." He drew in a breath. "And I realized that without meaning to, I no longer knew how to imagine the future without you in it." Olivia's breathing had grown quicker. A tear shone at the corner of one eye. "Leonard, let me finish, please." He straightened his shoulders. "I do not want a wife merely to satisfy society. I do not want a decorative figure at the head of my table. I want a partner. I want someone who will argue investments with me, who will tell me when I am wrong, who will share decisions, not only dances." His gaze locked onto hers. "I want you." Silence thickened the air. "If the law were different," he went on, voice lower now, "you would command your own affairs, and I would be proud to say I stood at your side. Since it is not, the only thing I can promise is this: if you ever choose to bind your life to mine, your talents will not be buried. I want you in what I do. Wherever I have authority, I intend to treat you as an equal." He saw then the first tear trace its path down her cheek. "That is why I came," he finished, voice rough. "Not to kneel in the middle of a ballroom and put on a spectacle, but to say here only to you that I wish to court you with serious intent. And if one day you grant me hope, to formally ask for your hand from whoever has the right to speak for you." He opened his hands slightly, a disarmed gesture. "May I have that honor, Olivia? The honor of trying to be the man at your side, not only the Duke in front of you?" She went very still. Leonard could almost hear the hallway clock marking each second. He watched emotions move across her face like swift clouds: fear, surprise, something dangerously close to joy. "I have spent my life believing I could not have both," she said at last, "that I had to choose between being strong and being loved, between caring for others and being cared for." She looked up. "You make me believe it might not be necessary to choose." She stepped closer to him. "I'm afraid, Leonard," she said simply, "afraid of feeling too much, of losing control, of trusting, and—" Her voice faltered for a moment. "But I also have hope. And if we wait for my fear to disappear entirely, you will stand at the door forever." A small, hesitant, luminous smile appeared. "So, yes, you may have that honor. You may court me. You may speak to Mr. Hartwell when you think it appropriate." She drew a breath. "And I will try not to run." The relief that washed through him was so intense, he almost laughed. Instead, he took her hands in his, carefully, as if holding something far too delicate to risk any force. "How you have just made me a ridiculously fortunate man," he said, his voice unsteady. She let out a small laugh through her tears. "Perhaps we have both had a touch of luck today." They stood there for a moment, hands entwined, eyes locked. No ring, no proclamation, no audience. And yet something had been sealed between them with the weight of a promise. Not yet a formal engagement, not yet an announcement to London, but the decision, intimate, inevitable, to walk toward one another. The rest, Leonard knew, would come in time, speaking with Hartwell, enduring the comments, facing the scrutiny of a society that did not look kindly on dukes giving their hearts to merchants' daughters. All that could wait a few days. What could not wait any longer was the truth that at last had been spoken. Olivia Brennan had opened the door to her life, and he would spend as long as it took proving he deserved to cross it and stay. Chapter 9. The Courage to Belong. Olivia woke on her wedding day with the distinct feeling that she was living inside a dream. 6 weeks had passed since the day when, after a courtship as intense as it was respectful, Leonard had formally asked for her hand, first from Mr. Hartwell in his role as administrator of Henry Brennan's estate, and then from her in private, kneeling before her with that disarming mixture of steadiness and vulnerability that had very nearly taken her breath away. 6 weeks of hurried preparations, announcements in the papers, whispers in drawing rooms, and at the same time 6 weeks of conversations in which she had discovered, slowly but surely, that true love did not require her to shrink her strength. Morning light filtered through the curtains of the bedroom. For a moment Olivia lay still, listening to the familiar sounds of the house waking up. She recognized Charlotte and Beatrice's voices in the corridor, bright with excitement, arguing over last-minute details. In a few hours, she would no longer be Miss Brennan. She would be the Duchess of Leinster. The thought still unsettled her, not the marriage itself about which no shadow of doubt remained, but everything that would follow. The weight of the title, London's eyes forever upon her, expectations that would often be greater than any woman could reasonably be expected to bear. "Livy?" Charlotte's soft voice was followed by the light creak of the door. "Are you awake?" "I am." Olivia pushed herself up in bed, smiling as her sisters entered with a tray of tea and toast. "It still feels a little unreal, though." "Believe me," Beatrice said, setting down the tray, her eyes shining. "It is happening, and it's going to be beautiful. You and the Duke, you go together in a way that's frankly quite irritating." A warm, diffuse feeling filled Olivia's chest. In the past weeks, Leonard had visited frequently, always with a proper chaperone under Lady Ashton's, Hartwell's, or the sisters' watchful eye, and yet with a new intimacy. He had consulted her about investments, asked her opinion on changes at Leicester, shared his worries about the weight of the dukedom. He had kept his promise. He treated her as a partner, not an ornament. And she had grown attached to him more deeply with each passing day, not because of grand gestures, but because of his constancy, his honesty, his careful attention. "Are you afraid?" Charlotte asked, pouring her tea, gaze intent. "A little," Olivia admitted. "Not of him, never of him. I'm afraid of not being enough, of not knowing how to be a duchess in the way London expects me to be." "Olivia Brennan," Beatrice said, taking her hand with surprising firmness. "You have run this house, taken care of us, argued business with men who barely listened to you, all in the middle of grief. If anyone is capable of handling Leicester, it is you." The words struck something tender and unguarded. Tears burned behind Olivia's eyes. "I'll miss this house," she murmured. "I'll miss you both. I'll miss it being just the three of us." "And it will still be the three of us," Charlotte corrected, slipping an arm around her shoulders. "Only now with bigger rooms, more gardens, and a duke who has already resigned himself to seeing us far more often than is decent." Olivia laughed, brushing away the tears. "He did say yesterday that he expects to see you at Leicester as often as you wish. He claims duchesses must not be deprived of inconvenient sisters." "Then he has his wits about him," Beatrice declared, with a solemnity far too dramatic to be serious. "Now come, we have a bride to dress, and she cannot arrive late to her own wedding." 2 hours later, Olivia stood before the mirror, and for one brief moment she did not recognize the woman looking back at her. The gown was soft ivory with silver detailing, discreet enough to honor the lingering shadow of mourning, beautiful enough to steal one's breath. Charlotte had arranged her hair into an elegant style, and Beatrice, with careful hands, had fixed the delicate veil that had once belonged to their mother. "Papa would be so proud," Charlotte whispered, her voice thick. Olivia's fingers found the small brooch pinned discreetly over her heart, the one her father had given her on her 21st birthday. "I hope so," she murmured. "I hope that, wherever he is, he knows that I am happy, that I found someone who sees me the way he always did. He knows," Beatrice said with quiet conviction. "I'm certain he's smiling right now." The carriage took them to the church. As she stepped down, Olivia saw the size of the gathering. It seemed as though half of London had come to witness the union of the Duke of Leicester and the daughter of a merchant who had dared to prosper. But as she entered the nave, decked in white and green flowers, the crowd fell away. At the far end of the aisle, by the altar, stood Leonard. He wore immaculate ceremonial attire, but it was his face that held her. This was not the polished smile of ballrooms, but a bare expression of tenderness and grateful wonder. His amber eyes shone, damp, and as she began down the aisle, with Charlotte and Beatrice at her sides, he did not look away from her for even a moment. There was no father to give her away, no guardian, no male relative. Her sisters walked with her, one on each side, but Olivia knew, with a quiet certainty that steadied her, that she was not being handed over to anyone. She walked by her own decision, step after step, choosing this man, this life, this future. With every step her certainty grew. At the altar, Leonard extended his hand. She took it without the slightest hesitation. "You look breathtaking," he murmured, low, for her alone. "And you are about to cry in front of all of London," she replied, smiling through the mist in her own eyes. "If I do, so be it." A half-smile tugged his lips. "It is an acceptable risk, considering I have just become the most fortunate man in this church." The vicar began the ceremony. The words drifted through the air with the expected solemnity, but Olivia barely registered the formulas. She felt only the warmth of Leonard's hand around hers, the solid presence at her side, the way he looked at her from time to time, as though the whole world had narrowed to this moment. When the time for the vows came, Leonard turned fully to her. His voice was steady, clear, threaded with restrained emotion. "I, Leonard Charles Hawke, take you, Olivia Margaret Brennan, to be my wife." His eyes held hers. "I promise to honor and respect you, to listen to your words and hold your judgment in high esteem. I promise to be your companion in all things, to support your strength when it is tested, to offer shelter when the world weighs too heavily. I promise to love you not despite your courage, but precisely because of it, for as long as breath is granted to me." The tears she had fought so stubbornly finally broke free, slipping down her cheeks unchecked. When her turn came, she drew a deep breath and answered, her voice trembling yet firm. "I, Olivia Margaret Brennan, take you, Leonard Charles Hawke, to be my husband." She felt the weight of the words and accepted it. "I promise to trust you with my heart, my mind, and the truth of who I am. I promise to be your companion in every joy and trial, to steady you when you falter, to tell you the truth even when it is hard to hear, and to walk by your side, not behind you, in all that life brings us. I promise to love you not for the Duke everyone sees, but for the man I found when the masks fell away. Today, and for as long as I am given to do so." The rings, simple bands of gold Windicrate, were exchanged by hands that trembled. When the vicar finally declared them husband and wife, Leonard lifted his hands to her face, touching her cheeks with exquisite care. The kiss that followed was brief, chaste to the eyes of the world, but laden with all that words could not contain. When he drew back, Leonard rested his forehead against hers for a heartbeat and murmured, "My Duchess." His smile softened. "My Olivia." The reception, held at Wexford House, was as elegant as one might expect from a ducal wedding, and yet somehow surprisingly intimate. Leonard seemed determined not to let go of Olivia's hand for more than a few moments at a time, presenting her to everyone not merely as his wife, but as an active part of the life they were building together. At one point, during a conversation with a small cluster of gentlemen, Lord Pemberton turned to her. "Your Grace, have you a position on the latest developments in the railway question?" His tone held a faint air of provocation. "I do, yes," she replied calmly, "particularly as some of the capital involved belongs to me, despite the law's insistence on saying otherwise." A trace of irony curved her lips. "I trust my husband will continue to be so kind as to consider my opinions, even now that I am officially incapacitated from managing them." Some of the gentlemen laughed. Others raised their brows, caught between disapproval and fascination. Leonard only smiled, pride in his expression so clear he made no attempt to hide it. "My wife," he said to the group, "understands our enterprises in a way none of us alone can match. It would be an unforgivable folly not to take her counsel very seriously indeed." Olivia saw glances exchanged, some critical, some thoughtful, and to her own surprise, she did not feel intimidated. She was where she had chosen to be, beside a man who was not afraid of the respect he bore her. Later, when they finally managed to escape onto the terrace, the noise of the reception receded into a distant hum. The gardens stretched out under the golden light of late afternoon. Leonard slipped an arm around her waist, drawing her a little closer. "How do you feel, my lady?" he asked softly, his voice a blend of affection and humor. "Frightened," she admitted, resting her head on his shoulder. "Happy. At peace. In a way I am still trying to understand. All of it at once." "Then we are the same," he murmured, pressing a light kiss to the top of her head. But above all, I am grateful. I know that taking on this title at my side is no small decision. I know you could have chosen a simpler path, a quieter life. For the first time I did not feel I had to choose between duty and desire, she replied, turning to face him. I chose both. I chose you. His eyes shone again. As soon as we manage to slip away from London's curiosity, we shall go to Tuscany, he promised. I want to see you before those landscapes, under that sky. I want to keep, with you, the promise your father made. Together, she repeated, savoring the word. For the first time, the thought of the future does not seem more threat than comfort, because I am no longer facing it alone. There, on the terrace, bathed in the day's fading light, wrapped in the arms of the man she had chosen, Olivia felt something awaken inside her that she had not known since before her father's illness. Not an absence of difficulty, not the vanishing of fear, but peace. The peace of someone who knows that, whatever weight the road may hold, she no longer carries it alone. She had a partner. She had an equal in respect and affection. She had a love that did not demand she become smaller to fit, a love that somehow made her more than she had ever imagined she could be. When Leonard kissed her again, sweetly, yet full of promise, Olivia finally understood what Charlotte had tried to tell her weeks before. She was not surrendering her strength. She was discovering that true strength also includes the courage to be loved. Olivia Brennan, now Olivia Hawke, Duchess of Leicester, felt for the first time that she belonged, not merely to a title or a house, but to the life she had chosen, to the woman she had become, and to the man who loved her exactly for that. Epilogue. Tuscany, summer of 1854, 18 months after the wedding. Olivia woke to golden light spilling through the windows of the villa, carrying with it the scent of lavender from the fields. She stayed still for a few moments, simply feeling the gentle warmth of the Tuscan morning, the distant sound of church bells drifting up from the village, and beside her, Leonard's quiet breathing still asleep, one arm firm and possessive, yet always gentle, resting over her waist. She turned her head on the pillow to look at him. 18 months of marriage had changed many things, but not that. The way her heart still sped up whenever she saw him like this, unguarded, without any of the masks he had learned to wear so well in London. There was peace in his face now, a peace that hadn't existed when they first met, as if he too had finally found a place where he belonged. The journey to Tuscany had been his gift. The promise he'd made at the Royal Academy, on that day when everything began to shift away from what the world expected of them, finally fulfilled. 3 months of Florence, Siena, and small villages tucked between rolling hills. Days spent in museums and galleries, nights on verandas talking about everything and nothing, and little by little, something inside Olivia had begun to mend. The ache of losing her father hadn't vanished, but it no longer crushed her. It had softened into a gentle, grateful memory, as though she could finally think of him without feeling the ground open beneath her feet. "You're watching me," Leonard murmured, sleep roughening his voice, a smile already forming on his lips. "I am," she admitted, tracing the line of his jaw with her fingertips, "and thinking how very fortunate I am." He opened his eyes, those golden eyes that had unsettled her from the first moment, and pulled her a fraction closer. "I'm the fortunate one," he corrected, kissing her temple. "Waking up beside you every day is more than a man like me had any right to expect." "Nonsense," she laughed softly. "You've worked for this every single day, Leonard Hawke." They stayed like that for a while, wrapped in the soft silence of the morning. Olivia let her thoughts drift back to London, to the life they were building. Returning after the wedding hadn't been without its challenges. There had been whispers about the Duke who consulted his wife on matters of business, about the Duchess who, discreetly but undeniably, attended certain investors' meetings and took part in decisions. But Leonard had never wavered. He defended her presence when needed, laughed at petty remarks and most of all kept making space for her at the same table where many still insisted she shouldn't sit. Slowly, almost without fanfare, things began to shift. Some ladies started seeking her out, curious about how she organized her days, how she involved herself in the running of the duchy. A few gentlemen, not many but enough, showed genuine interest when they realized nothing was collapsing, because a woman dared to think out loud. It was not a revolution, perhaps it never would be, but they were small cracks in a very old structure, and cracks let light in. "We should get up," she murmured, without much conviction. "Florence won't come to us." "Let Firenze wait," Leonard grumbled, hiding his face against her neck. "I don't recall promising the Medici punctuality." She laughed, but he was already more alert, as if something had just returned to his mind. "In fact," he said, sitting up, "there's something I want to show you before we lose ourselves in churches and galleries." "Leonard," she protested, "you've already given me Tuscany. Anything beyond that is excess." "It's not the sort of present that fits in a box," he replied. "It's a piece of paper." He rose, walked to the writing desk by the window, and came back with a few documents. There was a discreet tension in his movements that made Olivia straighten, curiosity sharpening. "What is that?" "Legal arrangements." He hesitated for a heartbeat. "I spoke with my lawyers before we traveled. I wasn't sure then if it was the right moment. Now I am." He handed her the papers. Olivia began to read. As her eyes moved down the page, her expression shifted. Surprise, disbelief, and then something deeper, which Leonard recognized as emotion breaking through her composure. "A trust?" she breathed. "For any daughter we might have." "For any daughter," he confirmed gently. "It guarantees she'll receive an education as thorough as any son's, numbers, management, everything your father so bravely gave you. And that, when she reaches a certain age, she'll have an income of her own, protected from reckless husbands or ambitious relatives. The assets will be formally held by trustees, but for her benefit. No one will be able to squander them without real necessity, and without her voice being heard." Olivia reread one of the pages, her fingers tightening slightly on the paper. "Leonard," she began, her voice catching, "you're trying to give our daughters what the law never allowed me." He smiled, that particular smile that always appeared when he spoke of the family they were building. "I'm trying to give them at least a portion of what you always deserved. A little more choice, a little more security that doesn't depend entirely on some man's goodwill." Before she could answer, a small sound rose from the cradle beside the bed. A soft grumble, followed by a sleepy little cry. Olivia turned at once, instinct, love, and wonder still tangled together, even 3 months later. Little Eleanor stretched her hands, eyes squeezed shut, mouth opening in protest against the morning. The tiny blanket embroidered with pale pink thread rose and fell with her unsettled breaths. Leonard watched the scene, the woman he loved and the child he had never imagined wanting so fiercely, and felt something in his chest expand until it almost hurt. "Go on," he murmured. But Olivia only smiled and moved back into his arms, tears bright in her eyes. "She has your nose," she said, laughing quietly. "And your temper in the mornings," he shot back. She set the documents down on the bed and wrapped her arms around him, holding on with a fierceness that said more than any words. "And if we have only sons after this?" she asked, half laughing through the tears that were now spilling freely. "Or daughters as tempestuous as our little storm over there?" "Then," Leonard replied without hesitation, "they, and all of them, will learn very early that none of them is worth a grain less than the other, and that the women of the Lannister family do not exist just to decorate drawing rooms." He brushed his knuckles along her cheek. "Above all, they'll learn that a man is not diminished by having a strong woman at his side. Quite the opposite. You taught me that, Olivia. I'd like our children to grow up knowing it from the cradle." She kissed him, long and deep, with that blend of gratitude and desire that still startled her. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his, drawing in a steadying breath. "Thank you," she whispered, "for thinking of them, for thinking of me, in a way the world never bothered to." "Thank you," he answered, pulling her back against his chest, "for having the courage to say no that first night. And then even more courage to say yes when it had become far more frightening." She laughed, a low sound full of memory. "If I had known back then that I'd end up here in Tuscany, with a daughter who has amber eyes and a duke drafting trusts for newborn girls, perhaps I would have refused you with less conviction. And I, he admitted, might have kept pretending I was satisfied with an empty life. Your refusal forced me to look at myself. He held her more tightly, and for several minutes neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The silence was full of everything that had already been said, and everything that no longer needed to be. Outside, the Tuscan hills rolled away in green and gold under the clear sky. Neither of them rushed to the window. The beauty of the world was there, but oddly, it felt secondary to the quiet certainty wrapped around them here. Olivia thought, not without a trace of wonder, that home was no longer the house in Bloomsbury, nor even Leicester Hall. It was no longer simply the place where her books, her papers, her memories were kept. Home, she realized, was this: a pair of arms in which she could rest without feeling that the world would collapse if she did. It was the unexpected freedom of being strong and yet allowing herself to be held. It was being known completely, and for all that not loved despite it, but because of it. "Leonard?" she murmured, her voice almost lost in the sound of his heartbeat. "Yes?" "Thank you for not giving up when I said no." He smiled against her hair. "I couldn't have," he said simply. "Once in my life something felt too real to walk away from, and she was dressed in mourning, refusing me with all the dignity in the world." She laughed again, now with no shadow of pain. "We were two lonely souls, remember?" she said. "You surrounded by people and empty. Me surrounded by responsibilities and so tired." "And now?" he asked, pulling back just enough to see her face. "Now," Olivia answered, "I don't feel alone anymore. Not because I stopped being who I am, but because I found someone who walks beside me." "Then we're even," he concluded. "Because ever since you walked into that church in ivory and silver, I've never felt incomplete again." They stayed like that while the Tuscan morning ripened into full day. Both of them knew challenges would come again. In England, in business, in the family they still hoped to have. Life had not become suddenly easy. But for the first time, neither of them feared the weight of what was ahead. The weight, now, was shared. Olivia Hawke, Duchess of Leicester, had once been the woman who dared to say no. And she had become the woman who one day found the courage to say yes, not to the narrow expectations of a world determined to confine her, but to the freedom of being wholly herself beside someone who saw her exactly that way. And Leonard Hawke, who had spent years hiding behind smiles and games, had finally discovered that true courage did not lie in collecting fleeting applause, but in allowing one single person to see him entirely. They had found each other when both were lost, and together they had built a home, not only in the stone of ducal estates in London streets or Tuscan hills, but in one another: refuge, challenge, companionship, love, enough to call it forever. And so our story comes to an end. If this tale moved you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more heartfelt stories just like this.